This is BBC World News Today. I'm Kasia Madeira. Our top stories. EU leaders agree a deal on how to tackle migration, but the President of the European Council says it is too early to talk about success. The UK is also told to reveal its plans for Brexit to ensure an agreement is reached in time.
There's a great deal of work ahead, and the most difficult tasks are still unresolved. If you want to reach a deal in October, we need quick progress.
Police say the gunman who shot dead 5 people at a newspaper office in Maryland would have killed even more if he'd had the chance.
This was a targeted attack. We can't fathom why that person chose to do this.
3 decades after Britain's worst sporting disaster, the police officer in charge on the day at the Hillsborough football stadium is to stand trial for manslaughter. Hello and a warm welcome to World News Today. European Union leaders have admitted that the deal that they've reached on controlling migration from Africa will be difficult to implement. After an all-night talk in Brussels, they agreed to set up secure migrant centres in EU states in order to process asylum claims, but they would be on a voluntary basis, and so far no country has actually volunteered to host them. External border controls will be strengthened and migrants will be prevented from moving within the EU. And the deal will also explore the possibility of what are being described as regional disembarkation platforms, basically camps outside the EU, which would process refugees and migrants. So far, no African countries appear willing to have them on their territory. Here's what the European Council President Donald Tusk had to say about this agreement.
It is far too early to talk about a success. We have managed to reach an agreement in the European Council. But this is, in fact, the easiest part of the task, compared to what awaits us on the ground when we start implementing it.
Donald Tusk there. Well, EU leaders differ sharply over how the migrant deal will work, as the BBC's Europe editor Katya Adler now explains.
I think in the end you can say that in what leaders agreed on migration, they've pretty much failed on 2 very big fronts. First of all, trying to prevent more migrants entering Europe illegally and trying to stop migrants dying at sea, as we saw today on the coast of Libya. Now, the idea behind the processing centres is to put economic migrants off even trying to come to Europe once they realise that only those with a legal right to asylum or refugee status are allowed to stay. But in the summit conclusions here, we heard that those centres will be voluntary in and outside the European Union, so we don't know where or when or even if they'll be operational, and in the meantime migrants will continue to risk their lives taking that dangerous boat across the Mediterranean. The second failure is more of a political one. Since the height of the migrant crisis, migrant arrivals have gone down by 95%, so the stresses between EU leaders are very political. At the end of this summit, leaders like Angela Merkel said a significant step forward was made. Well, this is a hint that in true EU summit style they've papered over the cracks. But is Europe north, south, east and west now united behind a common migration policy? Absolutely not.
Katya Adler. And while EU leaders debate migration in Brussels, in the Mediterranean, a number of rescue ships are still searching for the migrants who've become stranded as they try to make that crossing to Europe. It is feared that around 100 migrants drowned when their overcrowded boat ran into trouble on Friday off the coast of Libya. The missing include 2 babies and 3 children. The 16 people who survived say that within hours of setting off from the Libyan coast, there was an explosion aboard their inflatable dinghy. Our correspondent Gavin Lee has spent several days on board one of the rescue ships, which has been waiting for days to find a place to dock. He has sent this report from Marseille.
The end of a 4,000-mile sea odyssey for the Aquarius. The crew finally allowed to dock in France after being at the centre of a political storm. The problem started when they rescued more than 600 migrants from unseaworthy rubber boats off the Libyan coast, but were suddenly banned from using Italian and Maltese ports, which forced them to take migrants to Spain. The Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini has since stopped all foreign-flagged charity-run ships from entering Italian waters, accusing them of encouraging people smuggling.
Thank you very much.
Over the past 10 days, the BBC has been on board and witnessed the crew travel back to the search zone and carry out practice rescue drills, while the Italian authorities excluded them from helping. They instead instructed the EU-trained Libyan Coast Guard to intercept all migrant boats in distress. As the team returns to land for a crew change and refuelling, they are exhausted and frustrated at the political efforts to keep them from working off the Libyan coast. And they say the lack of access to nearby ports has effectively rendered their operations futile. And they're calling on EU leaders to consider the consequences. This is where migrants are taken, detention centres in Tripoli, condemned by the UN as inhumane. EU leaders say they're working on a longer-term solution, but that might not involve NGO ships. The Aquarius crew is considering whether it can continue.
If the authorities controlling the search and rescue zone are not willing to let us do that job, of course we're going to have to start questioning what we're doing out here. But you know, in the meantime, we're going to continue to be present and try to do that job.
Today, around 100 people are thought to have drowned off Libya's coast. The future of these NGO ships rests on whether Europe's leaders see them as a taxi service for illegal migrants or allow their presence as humane lifesavers. Gavin Lee, BBC News, Marseille.
So migration is one of the key issues dominating those talks in Brussels. The other issue is Brexit. The President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, has called for the UK to lay its cards on the table if it wants to resolve all outstanding issues in time for a summit in October. The British Prime Minister Theresa May says that she's ready to pick up the pace of the negotiations, and the UK government has promised to publish more details about its plans. From Brussels, Laura Koonsberg reports.
Hovering in the background, Brexit has been a footnote, not the main order of business here. But Brussels' main broker had prepared a very big message to give.
Huge and serious divergence remain, in particular on Ireland and Northern Ireland. Now we are waiting for the UK white paper, and I hope it will contain workable and realistic proposals.
The EU's frustrated with what they see as Britain's lack of decisions on Brexit. It sounds, though, like the Prime Minister is irritated right back.
We are ready to intensify and accelerate the pace of negotiations. I want to see that from the European Commission and the European Union.
But by sunrise, it was all quiet on the British front. Theresa May had been and gone, and it's that relative silence, as the EU sees it, that frustrates them so. Gathering again, they mulled over the state of play. One government source said this is a prolonged finger-wagging exercise. But insiders suggest there's real despair among the member states. This time next week, the cabinet at home will be locked away in their own talks, trying to resolve once and for all. What will the relationship with the EU really be? The best of friends, or just respectful neighbours?
There's a great deal of work ahead, and the most difficult tasks are still unresolved. If you want to reach a deal in October, we need quick progress. This is the last call to lay the cards on the table.
Then again,
un message simple, nous ne pouvons plus attendre.
A simple message, we can't wait anymore.
European voices can shout ever louder, but the coming drama for Theresa May is the one that awaits her at home. Can she solve in just 7 days the contradictions that the Tories have struggled with for 2 long years?
Do you think Theresa May will be able to resolve the differences in her cabinet?
Yes.
And what happens if she does not?
She will.
She will? Why are you confident when the UK...
Because I know her.
So you trust that she will be able to get her party together?
I was always trusting the British Parliament.
And
Yet the EU's frustrated, hanging around for Britain. In a week, we should know what they're waiting for. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Brussels.
Let's turn to Maryland in the US now, where police say that the gunman who shot dead 5 people at the offices of a newspaper in Annapolis was there to kill as many people as he could. The attacker has been identified as Jared Ramos. He surrendered to police, and on Friday he appeared in court, charged with 5 counts of murder. He is understood to have had a long-running feud with the publication. The chief of police, Timothy Altomare, said that he wouldn't say the attacker's name as he gave us this update.
This was a targeted attack We can't fathom why that person chose to do this. We don't think we have any more clear and present dangers to the citizens of Anne Arundel County. That person has had a history with the Anne Arundel County Police Department. In May of 2013, we did have a situation where online threatening comments were made. We had a detective assigned to investigate it. The detective spoke with legal counsel for the Capital Gazette, several members of the Capital Gazette staff. Mr. Marquardt, who's had some comments in the news media, was scheduled to be on that conference call. He did not call in. On that conference call, it was discussed that the Capital Gazette did not wish to pursue criminal charges. There was a fear that doing so would exacerbate an already flammable situation.
Well, President Trump has been giving his thoughts on this shooting, and this is what he had to say just a short time ago.
This attack shocked the conscience of our nation and filled our hearts with grief. Journalists, like all Americans, should be free from the fear of being violently attacked while doing their job.
And earlier, our correspondent Neda Tawfik gave us an update from Annapolis.
Here, this paper really has today been a mix of some of the first-rate reporting from the reporters who found themselves at the center of this story, and also tributes to their colleagues. You'll see in this opinion page that they've left it absolutely blank today to pay tribute to them. Now, Gerald Ramos is going to appear in court via video link. He is being charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, but authorities are saying that he is still not cooperating with them, and this is still very much an active investigation. They say that he had a long-running dispute with the paper, and the paper gave further details of that. They said that this all goes back to a defamation case that he launched against them back in 2012 after they detailed a harassment case that a former classmate of his brought against him. Now, this went through Maryland's courts, and they ruled in the paper's favor. But since the shooting, a former editor at the time, who's no longer with the paper, said he recalled being worried about Ramos and telling his attorney, this is someone who could possibly come and shoot us. So really, we're getting kind of more of a picture about these past few years and the threats against this paper. Now, investigators have said that they're also combing through social media threats, some as early as Thursday, from an account that they are trying to confirm is absolutely linked to Gerald Ramos.
Here in the UK, a police commander will go on trial for the manslaughter by gross negligence of 95 Liverpool football fans in the Hillsborough disaster almost 30 years ago. A judge ruled that David Duckenfield, a former chief superintendent of South Yorkshire Police, and 4 other men should face charges. Judith Moritz reports.
Nearly 30 years since David Duckenfield was in charge at Hillsborough, he'll now appear in the dock of a criminal court. It's the first time that anyone has been charged with the deaths of 95 Liverpool fans who were killed when the terraces at the Sheffield ground became overcrowded during an FA Cup semi-final in 1989. Mr Duckenfield is accused of failing to take reasonable care for their safety, and it's alleged that amounts to gross negligence. 96 supporters were crushed, the youngest a boy of 10, the oldest a pensioner of 67. The match commander can only be charged in connection with 95 of the fans. For legal reasons, he can't be prosecuted for the death of the final victim, Tony Bland.
We are unable to charge the manslaughter of Anthony Bland, the 96th casualty, who died almost 4 years later. This is due to time limitations imposed by the law as it applied at the time.
18 years ago, David Duckenfield was prosecuted privately. An order was then imposed to prevent him being put on trial again. Now that order has been lifted. 4 other men will also stand trial. Graham McCrell, former Sheffield Wednesday club secretary, is charged with breaching health and safety at sports ground legislation. Separately, 2 senior police officers, Donald Denton and Alan Foster, and a solicitor, Peter Metcalfe, are accused of perverting the course of justice by amending police statements in the wake of the disaster. Former Chief Constable Sir Norman Bettison has applied to stop the proceedings against him. His case has been adjourned until August. Some of those bereaved by Hillsborough were at court today to watch the ruling. They'll be back again when the first trial gets underway. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Preston.
Still to come here on BBC World News, we will have the very latest on the desperate search for a group of teenagers and their football coach who have been trapped for 6 days in a flooded cave in northern Thailand. Hello, welcome. You are watching BBC World News today. I'm Kasia Madeira. Our main headlines. The President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, says that leaders have reached a deal on migration and they've called for more clarity on Britain on its next Brexit plans. Police say that the gunman who shot dead 5 people at a newspaper office in Maryland would have killed even more if he'd had the chance. It is now 6 days and 5 nights since a group of teenagers and their football coach disappeared inside a flooded cave in northern Thailand. The huge search for this missing group, which is thought to have been cut off by rising floodwater, has gripped the country. Thailand's Prime Minister has now arrived in Chiang Rai province to meet with the emergency workers, just as teams of US and British divers have arrived to join in the rescue effort in this remote jungle region. Our correspondent Jonathan Head reports.
We're on our way up the side of a mountain to check out holes in the ground. It's hot, steep and very slippery. But there's just a chance, a small one, that it might lead to the missing boys. There have been so few possibilities for getting into the caves that the Thai police are making the most of this one. The National Police Chief has hiked up to direct this operation. Their plan is to lower climbers into a narrow fissure, barely wide enough for an adult. It's one of several such holes, but this is the most hopeful, discovered by 2 British cavers yesterday.
Well, what we're watching here is police climbers going down this really very small opening in the rock. It's very tight. They've tied a rope to a log across it to hold them. There's a lot of people up here, but the whole thing feels like they're kind of improvising, just trying to find a way through to see whether this leads to the caves.
Where's Rob? Are you going to move in now? You want to eat first? No,
Rob and Vern, the 2 British cavers, have come back from climbing down another hole that didn't lead anywhere. They've both explored these caves thoroughly in the past. Valuable experience now.
We can say that here, or in fact about 26 metres over there, is where the end of the cave underneath us is likely to be. And it's unlikely, very unlikely, but we have to rule out all possibilities that the children could have got to that chamber.
As they descend, the climbers send back video of their progress. Later in the day, they discovered a large chamber, a rare piece of positive news, though it's not clear yet whether this connects to the main caves. They're now being supplied by helicopter, so they can keep on looking, up here on the hillside. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Tam Luang Caves, northern Thailand.
Yes, of course, we're monitoring that operation on our website. Now, let's take a look at some of the day's other news stories. The US car manufacturer General Motors has warned that American tariffs on imported vehicles could reduce its presence both in America and overseas. President Trump has threatened to impose the import taxes after EU leaders responded to tariffs on exports of steel and aluminium, with additional charges on several American products. And Canada has also threatened dollar-for-dollar tariffs in response to those American taxes on exports of steel and aluminium. The Foreign Minister, Chrystia Freeland, said that Donald Trump's claim that the imports threatened American security were not just untrue, they were also hurtful. Now let's get all the sports news. Tim Hague joins us from the BBC Sports Centre. And Tim, a day of rest in the football, but it's also Thank you very much. I'm sure we're all very relieved to get some more footballing action. Now, just before I go, we've got enough time to show you some video from the United States and what has got to be one of the more unusual 911 calls that the emergency services have received.
Yes, 911. What's your emergency?
My life is in danger. I'm actually on the rooftop of my car. Someone is driving. Get out! Stop the car now! Stop the car! You're going back! I think she's going on the highway, and she's recording me while she's driving speeding, and I'm on top of the car.
You're on top
Just
of the
to explain
car
what's
right
going
now?
on, this is the man's ex-girlfriend allegedly behind the wheel, and get this, the pair had had an argument about who was going to drive the car. So yeah, don't argue. Thanks for watching.